Welcome back to the Suicide Prevention Show here on 1360 WLBK. Citizen Mike, we have a special guest in the studio. I wonder if you could please introduce him for us.
Absolutely. Today we're fortunate to have Dennis Miller, who's the coroner at DeKalb County. That's right. How are you doing, Dennis?
Good, thank you.
Fabulous. Can you tell us just a little bit about your job?
Well, my job is there's never two days that are ever alike. It's a very, for me, very interesting job and very exciting for me. It's also very rewarding what I do with and for the families that I serve.
Wow, fabulous! So, how can that be? I'm totally ignorant about what you're saying. So, how does it get to be rewarding? Tell us a little bit about that.
I deal with people at the worst possible times in their lives, which is the death of a loved one. I try and help those survivors deal with their grief and offer suggestions for them, and maybe help them to contact different agencies to help them through their grieving process.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, I was going to say, Denny, the emotional toll that must take on you, because it's not a job, obviously, you can just turn on and off and leave it at the office, as it were. How have you dealt with that mentally through the years, if I may ask?
I've had a lot of sleepless nights throughout the years I've been doing this. I've learned that material things in life don't mean a thing to me whatsoever. It's if you have your health and you're a good family, etc., good friends, that's all you really need in life is that.
And was there a moment in your life that you decided that this is what I want to do for a career? Was there a life-changing event?
Years ago, I applied for the position of deputy coroner. This was probably almost 30 years ago now. And I received that. I got that job as a deputy coroner at that time. I worked for 5 years for that gentleman. He retired and moved on to Syracuse, New York. Then I was appointed the coroner in January of '84. Then I ran in the '84 election and in all the elections since then. So it's an elected position, of course, in the state. So that's what I've been doing.
But, one of the fabulous things about that, we're talking about elected officials, and part of what you're saying is in a person's most difficult moment, you're there to help them and help them, orient them to the resources that will help them deal with the grief and deal with the aftermath of a death of any type. And that, to me, that's fabulous.
Of course, this is the Suicide Prevention Show, and if we could call upon you, Denny, just to mention some of the statistics that you have concerning suicide right here in DeKalb County, unfortunately.
That's correct. It really kind of disturbs me also because in 2005 we had 5 suicides that took place in the county, and last year, 2006, there were 12. That's, of course, more than double. It's very alarming. I don't know what the answer is. There are agencies out there that can assist with people who may have trouble or difficulties with their life, but unfortunately we have that high number to look at.
And you also said we already had 2 this year?
Correct. 2 since January of 2007.
And unfortunately, does it seem to work that way, Denny? Not copycats per se, but when someone takes their life, almost the onus for another person to follow suit, if you would.
I would see that more in younger children or younger people. Usually, at the time when a person dies, either they or their families get a lot of attention. It's not really attention; it's people, sharing their grief with them. Sometimes a young person may say, "Well, that's pretty neat. Mm-hmm. Maybe my family needs that." That's not the reason to get attention to your family or have a lot of people over, whatever the case may be. That is something that possibly could be looked at or should be looked at.
In addition to that, the suicide completion among a family member or a close friend is one of the markers used by mental health professionals to assess a person's risk of suicide completion. And so, yes, in the moment, there could be that copycat piece, and those people who are exposed to suicide completion are more at risk to complete suicide themselves.
And I have to ask Denny, because I'm relatively new to DeKalb County, been living here about 6 years, and I was shocked, actually, to find out that with the trains running through DeKalb, that unfortunately that is a method that many, and especially many young people, have chosen that method to take their lives.
It's pretty hard to fight a freight train, and the trains have been there for forever. There's been talk about raising the train, the railroad tracks over the city. It can't be done. It can be, but who's going to pay for it?
Right, exactly.
Use some common sense.
But has this been something that's been going on since you've been coroner?
Since day one. I've always had at least 1 or 2 who have taken their life by train throughout the years.
And Denny, how about, you said 2005 you had 5 deaths by suicide. Last year was 12. And I know with the group I work with, there's always the talk that there's that single car accident. We're out in the middle of nowhere, a car hits a tree, they pull in front of a semi, they cross in front of the train, et cetera, where it's very possibly suicide, but you have to maybe determine an accidental death or whatever. Thoughts on that?
When a person processes a scene or an agency processes a scene, you look at all the factors. Is the car working properly? Are the road conditions slick, hazardous? Is the person financially, is he in trouble? He or she in trouble? Are there spousal, disturbances? A boyfriend girlfriend situation? Things of that nature. You look at that and make sure that either yes they are or no they are not. In a circumstance like that, an autopsy would be necessary because a normal, healthy individual would not pull out in front of a train or a car or whatever. Their health conditions should be okay. If a person dies of a heart attack prior to the impact, then it's a natural death rather than an accident or a suicide.
Okay.
Or if the individual is being chased by another individual, you could have a homicide.
So you have evidence at the scene that tells you clues in terms of the cause of
Correct.
death.
The skid marks, was he going in excessive speed, things of that nature you have to look at.
And then after one of our shows recently, Chuck was talking about how the two of you met after Chuck's son completed suicide. And I was fascinated by that, and I'm wondering if the two of you guys would be willing to talk a little bit about that today.
Sure. Again, Denny and I have known each other for a lot of years, back in his days of deputy coroner, and so when my son died on a Sunday evening, he used a handgun and took his own life, and Denny was one of them that was over to the house that evening, and I had been a fireman myself, and my son was a fireman through Sycamore, and so a lot of the fire department personnel came over when they heard about it. But Denny came over, and yes, we were in a state of shock that I never knew a person could be in from all my years being a firefighter paramedic. After Denny was through checking the room where my son died, he sat down with me. We went down in our family room, I recall, and the fire chief was there with us, and said he knew how difficult this all was, but this is a situation where you can give back life also, and what's the possibility of organ donating, and that was something that we as a family, both my sons, my wife, and I had talked about over the years. We had it on our license that we want to be organ donors, to maybe further somebody else's life down the line, and so we agreed to that. Excuse me. And
can I ask you, Chuck, did that anger you that he asked you that, or what was your emotional state at that time?
Emotionally, we were just chaotic is the best way to say it.
Okay.
The fact that Denny brought it up, I commend him for it. It's got to be most difficult for him in his position to do that. I'm happy that somebody was able to think clearly, bring that up to us, and talk us through that in a positive manner. Some people choose not to do that. That is something, again, we'd always thought about doing. And so I'm happy somebody thought about doing that, and we could react, again, positively to that. So we did that. And Denny had said, later on as we talked through stuff, that it's a possibility somebody may contact us who was a recipient. And it went on for a period of time, and we did get a letter from the Illinois Eye Bank. And it was from a gentleman in central Illinois, and he wondered about the possibility of us meeting. And so you have to go back. You cannot talk directly to one another, recipient and donor family, right away. You go through the agency, and everybody's got to kind of know what's going to happen and get the okay to do that. And so we did that. And my son happened to be home from school at Christmas that year, and so he and my wife and I were going to go down to probably 50 or 60 miles down the line here to a restaurant that this gentleman knew of, and we were going to meet. And he and his wife were going to come and meet us. They just wanted to say what was on their mind, having received this cornea transplant. So just before the time come to leave the house, my son said, I don't think I'm ready for this yet. And so we said, fine, go ahead and just stay home, and we'll be back in a while. And when we got down there, the gentleman apologized to us because at the last minute his wife wasn't able to emotionally deal with it. And so we sat there, and we had we cried and and talked and cried and talked. And when I walked in, I knew which cornea had been transplanted. I mean, I could just tell. And the story with this gentleman was, at 13 years old, he and his sister were wrestling, and they landed on a glass coffee table, got glass in his eyes. He was legally blind since 13, and now he was like 38. And he had found out just a short time before that, before Mike's death, that there would be a possibility with a cornea transplant that he'd be able to see again because of all the advancements in technology and in medicine. So lo and behold, they called him. He had the cornea transplant, and now he was able to see again. And he just wanted to hug us and say, thank you for giving me the gift of sight again. It's changed my life. He could even drive by himself again. It was just amazing. And so to know that our son had a part of that, that's something I know Mike would have wanted. Again, we talked about it. And so I am thankful to Denny and stepping forward that evening in the most difficult, our deepest, darkest hour, and offering that up. So that is a positive out of a terrible negative, if you will. And so the gentleman was just couldn't say enough about thanking us. And actually, in the donor-recipient scheme of things, it is more of the recipients that want to make contact in this situation than it is the donors. Excuse me. The recipients are so thankful for the organ they got to change their life that they want to thank whoever was responsible for that.
And Denny, let me ask you: do you gauge that when you're there, and every scene different, whether you would ask that question, or is it a rule that you'll ask that to everybody?
I will offer. I try to offer it to every family that I come in contact with, if the scene or if the individual, if the circumstances allow, I would allow that to take place. If it's a homicide case where we actually need part of the tissue that would be donated, we can't do that because there are things that we have to look at. Maybe what caused the death might be part of this, whatever was going to be going on. But I do try and contact or approach every family that I come in contact with about tissue donation.
And we had Secretary of State Jesse White on last week talking about that, because I know he's been very instrumental in people marking on their driver's license. How important to you as a coroner that people let people know what their wishes are, unfortunately, after they pass away? It
is very important. I do have a slight problem with the driver's license situation. There was a law, this is the first consent law, which went into effect, I think it was 2 years ago now. Whereas if a person has yes on the driver's license to be a donor, it doesn't make a difference if mom or dad say no, we don't want it, or yes, we want, and it's not marked on the license. It's whatever is marked on the license is going to take place. I have a problem with that. I'm a strong supporter of donation, but if mom or dad or the kids say no, then you know what? It's not going to happen in DeKalb County.
You know, that's fabulous. I mean, one of the words you said here was that you offer the family the opportunity. And so, and the other thing that Chuck was talking about earlier is the wife being unable to go. I'm not sure, both wives were unable to.
No, my wife went, but the gentleman who was recipient, his wife said emotionally she was not going to be able to handle it at that time.
It was your son that was not able to.
And my son was not going to be
able to. And in
both
of those situations, you're honoring the choices of people. Yeah. And that's making that connection in life in a very meaningful way. And I mean, to me, that's awesome. Awesome to hear, awesome to see.
Well, Denny, it's been a pleasure having you here. Unfortunately, the time goes by so quickly on this show, too, and we wanted Chuck to share that story because he was deeply moved by how you handled that situation that night with Chuck, and you're both very courageous to talk about that, and we appreciate what you do, Denny, in a very, very difficult job.
Thank you very much. Yep. I think it's to answer your very first question, what I would do this, Chuck answered it right there, is because something very tragic happens, and I try and make something happen or something worthwhile, positive out of that circumstance. So that's the reason why I do it.
Denny Miller, DeKalb County Coroner, our very special guest here on this week's version of the Suicide Prevention Show.